Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a best-selling writer and multiple literary award nominee. She's a graduate of Colorado College, earning both a BA in English and a master's degree in education. She has dedicated her life to educating children and helping women navigate fertility treatment with confidence and hope. She's a national and international speaker on IVF, fertility, family building, women's history, and her experience as an in vitro pioneer. She made headlines in 1983, giving birth to one of the world's first IVF babies, known as Colorado's Miracle Baby. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Ellen Weir Casey.
Good morning. Thank you.
Ellen, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I believe I lived through a very interesting time in history, but it took me 35 years to realize that I had been in the middle of a global shift in reproductive technology as a patient. As you said, I am the mother of one of the world's first babies, conceived by the then experimental technique of in vitro fertilization. At that time, my daughter was called a test tube baby. No one had ever heard of IVF. I knew at the time it was a very important moment for me and for my family, and also for the women of the world. When I had my baby, I made it my personal mission to try to educate the public about what a test tube baby was. So I went on national television talk shows and gave interviews to national reporters. So I was in magazines, in the newspaper, and on TV. I did that with purpose. My purpose was to let other families know of this amazing technology that had been just created and was now operating in the United States. I was only at the second IVF program approved to operate in the US. So I went on TV in Boston and told everyone what this was so they understood. People were afraid at that time. They thought my baby was growing in a jar in a laboratory when I would tell people I was pregnant with a test tube baby. So I did that at the time. I told my story then, but 35 years later, I realized I had a very important story to tell. It's the only book written with the patient's experience in the earliest days of assisted reproductive technology. The motivation behind me writing this book was a group of young men, young dads in just, late 20s. And they said to me, Ellen, how on earth did you find all the doctors you went to before the internet? So welcome to Writers Over 50. And I thought, oh my God. And I said, well, I sat in the library basement going through microfiche. And these young men were fascinated and kept asking me how I managed to find the best doctors in the world. Well, I said, I went through microfiche looking through medical journals in the library basement. And I drove home from the party where I met these young guys, and I thought, oh my God, I need to write a book. That is when I decided to write a book 35 years after my experience.
Well, how does it feel to be introduced as the mother of Colorado's first miracle baby? And how does that miracle baby feel about that?
Oh, it's the best introduction I can possibly get. The best. I didn't only make a difference for my little family, I made a difference for the world. I believe I helped move IVF and the understanding along by helping the public understand what it was. And my little miracle baby just turned 40, and she has two precious babies of her own. And every time I hold that little 6-month-old and sing to him while he falls asleep on my shoulder, I am overwhelmed by the fact that he is only here because of IVF and what I did to be able to have my daughter, his mama.
That's so poignant. You know, in the 1980s, you were brave to undergo such experimental treatments. What gave you such a sense that this was going to be the path for you?
It was the only path. Both of my fallopian tubes were blocked. Now, the first thing I did was go for microsurgery. Only 2 doctors in the world were doing microsurgery. No one had heard about it in 1979. We flew to Vancouver, Canada, to Dr. Victor Gomel, who was one of the first 2 doctors. In fact, he was one of the only 2 doctors at that time doing microsurgery to open blocked fallopian tubes. And that worked. It was a 5-hour operation, only on 1 tube. I got pregnant within months and had an ectopic pregnancy, which was a life-threatening emergency situation. Then I had no other way to get pregnant. So I continued doing my research, found a doctor doing a very experimental program with laser surgery. Now, at that time, by then it was 1980, no one had heard of laser surgery. In fact, my husband said to the doctor, we were in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut, to meet him. And my husband said, the only lasers I've heard about are in the movie Star Wars. Now, again, I love that your podcast is for people over 50 because we all remember when Star Wars was the big movie, but that's all we knew about lasers. That surgery opened the other fallopian tube, but it resulted in an infection, so I lost the second tube. And this is how I got to IVF. The very first baby in the world, Louise Brown, had been born in 1978 before I was married or even thought about having children. And I remember when she was born and thinking, oh, isn't that nice? But that'll never happen again. So it wasn't an option for me until the first IVF baby in the United States was born. Elizabeth Carr was born in 1981, and I thought, bingo, if there's one program doing in vitro in the United States, there will be another. And I had a wonderful doctor at my home in Colorado Springs who found out ahead of time that the second IVF program in Houston, Texas, had been approved to operate. He called that doctor and said, you need to take Ellen Casey and her husband. And that's how I got into IVF.
Wow, Ellen, that's quite a story. And Unstoppable, the title of your book, should be your middle name for your perseverance and dedication to this goal.
Yeah, it's, when you said being brave, well, I didn't feel brave at the time. You don't feel brave when you're doing something brave. I knew I was scared going into surgery time after time. I had major surgery 8 times in 4 years, but I had to do it or I would not have a baby. Yes, I was scared, but I was more scared to never be a mother.
Well, that is a motivating phenomenon for most of us. And one of my daughters chose adoption to complete her family, just as my family chose adoption to complete theirs. I'm an adopted child, and there are just so many methods now of building a family. But I'm just so thankful that we're able to talk about your journey and your being a pioneer in the IVF arena.
Thank you. And that's, speaking of writing books over 50, it's so cool to write a book over 50. And boy, do I encourage everyone listening to write a story. It can be your personal story, as mine is, or fiction, science fiction, whatever you want. But we have lived through a lot of history ourselves by this time, which gives us a wonderful perspective that is missing when you try to write a book in your 30s. It's missing even in your 40s, but by the time you reach 50, 60, you can evaluate your own life. And when you are writing, that helps you decide what to put in and what to take out.
And that's why I call it writing in life's sweetest third.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, I think we definitely have 2020 hindsight and we can see the big picture of our lives. I think that's the time to write.
I so agree. So agree. And um, I had one of the hardest problems of writing, especially memoir, is who to take out and who to leave in. For me, it was about whom I wanted to speak negatively. And you can imagine what it was like having one of the world's first test tube babies. There was an enormous ethical, theological, moral backlash, which I faced head on. Now, there were even a few people in one side of the family who were very staunch Catholics and were against my baby, which was horrifying to me. And I was very unhappy with some of the statements that were made. And I got ready to write this book, and I thought, oh, now I can tell my story about that person. And you know what I did? I wrote the story and I told the situation where, well, I'm not going to say it, and I'll tell you why. I wrote the entire chapter and it was vivid and it was true. And I was so pleased with myself. But then I put it away for a few months, pulled it back out and thought, you know what? That did happen. And I'm glad you wrote that, Ellen, but don't put it in your book. When I was lucky enough to be accepted into the Aspen Institute right before I wrote my book, I had a very interesting lunch with Andre Dubus III, who wrote The House of Sand and Fog and many other excellent novels. He came over and introduced himself, and we had lunch. And I was telling him my story and talking about memoir. And he said, memoir isn't a place to seek revenge. And he said, just don't do that in memoir. And I thought about that. And I also think about, our other wonderful writer who said if they wanted me to write nicely about them, they should have treated me better. But I took the high road, and I'm so glad I did. I left that person completely out of my book.
I think memoir, has a history of disturbing families and bringing out family secrets. And so I always ask, how does your family feel about your memoir?
The side of the family that was not supportive of us was worried about it. I understand. And they said, oh, I hear your mom has written a book. What does she say about this person? And my daughter said, she doesn't mention her.
And the other statement that I love is living well is the best revenge.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it?
It
Taking
really
the
is.
high road,
Yeah.
as I did, demonstrates again my character and who I am and
Exactly
why
right.
I told this story. And the other reason that I wrote my book from such a distance is I believe that women need to know the stories of the women who went before them, women who opened doors that they can now walk through. My story is, of course, exactly that. I lived in the dawning days of assisted reproductive technology, and I had a lot of extreme successes and devastating failures, but I had resilience. And even though I was down on the floor crying in one scene, the next day I got myself up and began researching doctors again. I think resilience is critical, and young women need to know you too can survive what you think is the worst in your life. You can survive it and thrive.
That's so true. And, when I speak to book clubs about my first book, which was about adoption, there are so many young women who say, wait, why did anybody give up their baby for adoption? Because they haven't lived through those years where guilt and, shame was heaped on women's heads for being unwed and not married. And there was no other option for women then. And the young women today don't even know about that time. And it was only, a few years ago.
It was. So that's important. That's a very important reason for you to write your story. And in my book, we were on a wonderful adoption list that I would have loved to have an adopted baby. I'm a kindergarten and first grade teacher, and every time I had a student who was adopted, I had such a special feeling toward that little one, thinking, "Oh, you could have been mine."
I know. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought today so that we can hear your tone and voice in this book?
You bet. Now, I will set the stage by telling you that this is near the absolute end of the book. My book tells from the beginning moment when a doctor walked in and said, Ellen, you can't get pregnant, through 8 surgeries, 3 ectopic pregnancies, terrible emergencies, surgery in the United States, in Canada, until finally I was going through in vitro. At the very end of the book is the scene, it's the last scene in the book, where they are getting ready to transfer my embryos back into me. And the woman whose name is Sylvia that I use was the nurse practitioner who was a huge part of the in vitro program in Houston. Okay, so here we go. And her name is Sylvia. The next morning, I lay very still in a quiet, gently darkened surgery room. It was now 2 days after my 5 eggs had been harvested from my ovaries and fertilized. Sylvia had handed me a Valium tablet in a plated paper cup to swallow with water sometime in the last hour. I wasn't sure how long ago, as the effects of the sedative were filling me with a soft drowsiness and a feeling of well-being. Sylvia sat sideways on a chair in the empty waiting room and watched as I popped the pill into my mouth and gulped down the glass of water she placed on a table next to me. She explained in her quiet Southern manner how the embryos would soon be transferred into my body by Dr. Quigley. He would thread a tiny pipette through my cervix and push the embryo up into my uterus. I pictured the plastic toy syringe in my little doctor kit as a child. I would fill it up with water by pulling out the plunger, then squirt all of the water back out through the end. The Valium would make my mind and body calm and relaxed, Sylvia continued. The in vitro doctors had a new theory that quieting the body with a sedative would help the uterus not reject the embryos. Following the very simple embryo transfer in a few minutes, I would stay in the hospital all this day and through the night resting. Then what? I asked. I will be terrified to stand up in the morning for fear the embryos will fall back out. They won't fall out. Sylvia smiled patiently. Don't you think I should stay lying down for more than 24 hours? It just seems like such a risk. I will be afraid to go to the bathroom. I think I should stay in bed for a few more days just to be sure. Well, Ellen, the girls who are pregnant right now only stayed in bed for 24 hours. I noticed the slightest spark in Sylvia's eyes as she spoke. Oh my God, this program has achieved a pregnancy, I thought. At least 2 pregnancies, as she said, girls. Oh my God, it is true. My hands began to tingle, and I couldn't imagine finding words to respond. I knew that this extraordinary information had been carefully saved, only to be imparted today. All week, I had been noticing and analyzing how small bits of information were parceled out to me. It seemed to be another component of Dr. Quigley's plan of care to take care of the psychological state of the mother going through in vitro. The mother? There were mothers. This was staggering, game-changing news. Learning it now, on the very morning I was going to have our 5 live embryos transferred back into my body, filled me with overjoyed confidence. My body could have floated away like a helium balloon. I was so euphoric. No wonder they gave me Valium, I joked to myself. An intense physical need to have my embryos back inside of me where they belonged and where I could protect them surged through me smoothly as I began to relax into the tranquilizer. I lay under a warmed blanket on the narrow operating room table, my mind wafting slowly like a feather through a light blue haze in the dimly lit room, remembering. I remembered all of it. The 4 years of heartbreaking loss and brutal pain that had brought me to this room had certainly taken its toll. Every gasping sob, every tear, every scar, every hour spent poring through medical journals in the library, every second spent in emergency rooms and recovery rooms, every recurring thought of guilt, every single second of anguish would be worth it if today's final sweet moments of in vitro fertilization led to our success.
Oh, Ellen, you just gave me goosebumps. That is so well written, and you just had us right there. I felt like I was standing there holding your hand while you experienced all this.
I wish you had been. Thank you. Thank you. You
Yeah.
know, as you can tell, we had no idea that there was a pregnancy in this program. I only knew. Think about a time in your life where you did something that you only knew of 2 other people in the entire world, in all of history, who had ever gone before you. That was what it was like, walking into the door of a brand new in vitro fertilization experimental program. The only 2 people I knew of were the one in England and the one in the United States. But of course, I couldn't reach them. So to find out that there were pregnancies thrilled me.
Well, not only were you going through this entire situation, but your husband as well. He must have been so supportive of you to go through this journey, because I've heard of so many families who didn't survive when they went through traumas like this.
True, true. He was very supportive. He was always by my side. And every time I'd say, now, Peter, I have found another doctor and he's in Hartford, Connecticut. So we're going to fly from Colorado to Connecticut on November 24th. I usually didn't. Today, young women and men, husbands and wives, are very communicative. In the early 80s, that wasn't really the case. He did not know my devastation, my horrible emotions. I didn't want him to have that burden for many reasons, one of which being he could have said, no, let's not keep doing this. But he knew, and he was darling, and he was by my side through all of it. And the happiest daddy arrived to pick me up and our new baby at the hospital in a brand new car, a station wagon with enough room for a car seat.
That's so exciting. Well, you know, we writers like to write and we like to see our stories in print, but sometimes we don't like to publicize them. We don't like to promote ourselves. What have you been doing to promote this book?
Well, I recommend, especially to anyone over 50 and for me over 70, to really get a good understanding of how social media marketing works. Specifically for me, it has been Instagram. Instagram has been the greatest way for me to get followers. And it's not without being very time consuming. I look at other people on Instagram who have interest in reproductive history, in miscarriage, in fertility issues. And then I follow them for a significant amount of time to find out who this person is. And then what I have done is message them privately on Instagram and say who I am, what my book is about, and offer to mail a book to them free. I don't say free, I just mail it to them, of course. Then the reason this is such a good technique for advertising is then they read it and put it on their Instagram page, and all of their followers then are introduced to Unstoppable. I'm okay. I'm okay with publicizing myself, although I really don't like it. And you're right, that's a really good question that you asked, because since I've been having to do this, I often think it would be horrible to have to be a Hollywood actress and have to be posing every single day so that your face can stay relevant. I would not like to do that.
Well, your book certainly has a wonderful platform and so much to share with people who are going through the same issues. So that means that you're helping a lot of people. So that makes it easier to promote yourself.
It does. Thank you for saying that. The technology, the science, the public understanding of fertility issues is so much different than it was in the early 1980s, but the feelings of the woman are exactly the same. And my book is narrative nonfiction, which made it great fun to write. Because it was so traumatic, I had an eidetic memory of every single traumatic situation that I didn't really know I had until I began writing. And all of a sudden, every single detail, the taste of anesthesia, the smell of the hospital, the horrible feelings I had when I had to go to another baby shower, all became very clear. And women today have exactly the same experience.
And I think writing a book is sometimes therapy for us as well.
Well, it was interesting. It was certainly a means by which I was able to understand what I had gone through and to realize how it had been seared into my memory, even though I'd had just this wonderful, happy life raising my adorable, fabulous daughter, but it was still right there. And also, I'm lucky because I save everything in file folders. I had every doctor's prescription. I had every paper airplane ticket from, all the places that we flew. I had the hotel rooms and the pads from the hotels. It was really neat because it made me able to confirm whether or not my memory was true.
Well, Ellen, what does writing success look like to you?
Well, at first it was great because I made so many sales and zipped right up to be an Amazon bestseller, that was an immediate success and very fun. And then Zibby Owens found my book, and I was a finalist for a Zibby Awards, which is a really big deal. And it was fun. I got to go to New York and go to a party at her Park Avenue apartment and be surrounded by writers and literary agents. It was really great. That was the success for me. And now my success is it's so multi-layered, but one of which is the connections I've made with women going through fertility issues right now. And they text me, they write me emails, I send them books, I give them support. That is success, knowing that my book has made a difference in lives. Also, my Cambridge University found my book. Cambridge University contacted me a year ago and asked me to write a piece for them about another book coming out about Dr. Steptoe and Dr. Edwards, who were the first people to successfully create an in vitro baby, Louise Brown. Then, this is real success to me. I was invited to Cambridge University to the original home of in vitro fertilization, which is called Bourne Hall, just north of Cambridge, where I was honored. Among doctors, I met the doctor who delivered the world's first IVF baby, an elderly man. I met the physicians who are now the heads of the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and they call me a medical celebrity. Now, can you imagine? Of course, when it's you, you just sort of giggle when someone calls you something like that. But boy, that was really success. And being able to speak to a whole different audience in England has been quite interesting. And I've made friends, writing friends, but a lot of interesting friends in the in vitro community.
Wow, you have really come full circle in your life.
Boy, you said it right. Do you know that in order to have a memoir published, I had to send the chapters in which I had written about living physicians so that for their approval. And that was, talk about full circle. It was almost a karmic moment to be able to look the doctor whom I had known 40 years ago in the eye and thank him for changing my life forever for the better.
Well, this has been a wonderful visit with you today. And as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Oh, write your story. Now is the time. And what an amazing time in our lives to be relevant and to know how creative and smart we each are, and to be able to share the wisdom we have learned in whatever genre you choose to write.
Such wise advice, and we are just so thrilled to have you here with us today. I don't know if I've had another pioneer on this program, so I just encourage everyone to pick up Unstoppable and read it and see what this woman's journey was and how she's influenced generations to come. You have left a true legacy for everyone who's following you, Ellen. So thank you on behalf of all women, especially those who are having fertility issues. And we are excited now to call you one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. I have simply loved getting to meet you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.